Hello everyone. Feels kind of weird to be making another video. It always makes me kind of nervous whenever I'm making a video, and I haven't done this in like years. Oh, let me see. This one will be 5 stars. Oh, no, 1 star. That's perfect. In case you can't really tell, this is also the first time I have ever done this tier maker thing. It's like super iconic, but I've never personally used it, so I'm kind of figuring this out as well. So that's fun that you can kind of change what the things say, make your own tiers if you want. They don't have to be SAB, but I think we're gonna keep like S is 5 stars, A is 4 stars, etc. I hope everyone's doing good. Kind of trying to restart this channel, or remake it. You might see some like weird gaming videos from like 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. Down below, don't watch those. Those are from a very different era. We are hunkering down for this big snowstorm we're about to get. It's looking kind of scary. I had a game night scheduled tonight, but it's just kind of falling to pieces, so we'll see if we can play on Tabletop Simulator or something over Discord, so that should be fun. My wife is taking a test right now. Outside of this place. She has to be proctored, and it's like super strict, like she's not supposed to have anything in the room. So she's gone elsewhere. If you think of her, send up a prayer. Yeah, I've kind of been thinking about starting a little book channel for a while. I've been bouncing off a friend a while ago, and he was like, yeah, you should totally do that. And every now and then he'll bring it up again. And I'm like, yeah, I should totally do that, but I've not really. I don't know. It just is the kind of thing that can get away from you if you aren't really intentional about it. And so this is all the books that I read in 2025. I've got 1, 2, 3, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 books, which is pretty good for me. I am a bit of a slower reader, so I don't know how people get those like 200 books read in a year. I don't really think that they retain any of that. That seems impossible to me. Another thing just to say about this is that I really thought, when I was, setting this up, talking to my wife maybe about making like ranking the books that I read in the year, like what I'm doing right now. I don't think that I only read one author, right? There's some variety. I read a few other books, and she's like, no, you pretty much only read one author. So I've got a few books in here, but yeah, you're gonna see there's like one guy, one name that you're gonna see every time, and it's like, oh, there he is again. But one of my New Year's goals is to kind of diversify a little bit. I think I'm gonna read like a Brandon Sanderson book and then read a book by a different author and alternate, and I think that's gonna kind of be what I try to do. But without further ado, let's get into it. Starting off the year with a bang. I started reading this, I think, on Christmas Eve, and then it took me like a month and a half, maybe even 2 months to read, because this book, if you know anything about Stormlight Archive, Brandon Sanderson, this series is huge. But so this one is going, nope, straight. I don't know why it doesn't. I kind of don't want these emojis in it. I don't know why they have to be there. I couldn't figure out a way to remove them. It kind of seems like I can't interact. I think it might be because of the streaming software I'm using. This is the first time I'm using this streaming software, because I've never really like live streamed anything. I know this isn't a live stream, but like I'm streaming it live right now. So yeah, if you guys know anything about that, you can let me know in the comments, but it seems like I can't really interact with anything that gets close to like the top of what I'm recording. So I'll see if I can cut out these emojis, but you might just have to deal with them. But so yeah, The Way of Kings is going in 5 stars. This book really was amazing. I knew going into it, I'd already read, Mistborn. I'd read all the Mistborn books. I read, Elantris, Warbreaker. I knew what I was getting into with Brandon Sanderson, and I knew that The Way of Kings was like, what's up? But I don't think that I was fully prepared. It's kind of funny looking back. This book, when you're reading it, feels so large scale, like massive armies, massive plot, massive world. Everything seems like larger than life. It's so exciting. 3 1/4-ish books in, it feels kind of small. Like the books only get bigger and bigger in terms of scale, in terms of what's happening in the book. Everything just expands and gets bigger. Just some things that I really liked about this book. Kaladin and Dalinar especially are really immersive characters. All of the characters in this book are. You really get pulled into them. Sanderson has this great way of writing characters. If you've read a Brandon Sanderson book, half the time you'll get into it for like the world building and the fantasy aspects because everyone knows he's a master at that. But then what really hooks you are these characters and these really strong emotional moments that really connect you to them and make you love them, and it's just wonderful. There's one scene at the end, right? You're going through all these characters, Kaladin and Dalinar especially, and Shallan's in there too. I feel like Shallan takes some time to get into her own, but there's one scene at the end that just, it sticks with me. I think it's still one of my top 3 scenes in all of the Cosmere, all of Brandon Sanderson's interconnected world. At the very end, focusing kind of on Dalinar and Kaladin and where their 2 journeys intersect. But yeah, I love this book. I love this series. And I think if you love fantasy, you should at least give this a try. I know there are some people who it's not for them, and it is intimidating looking at like a 1,000-page book. And I think sitting in a long book like this with the same characters, just like marinating in this world and with these people, really connects you to them in a way that shorter books really can't. Okay, moving on to the Alloy of Law. I'm gonna put the Alloy of Law at 3 stars. This is the first book in the second Mistborn trilogy. So a little bit of backstory. Last year, I just sped through Mistborn. The first 3 books, absolutely loved them. And then like, oh, there's a sequel trilogy that happens 300 years later. Let's see what that's about. And so I read all 4 of the sequel series books, which is the Wax and Wane books. And I started to realize I hadn't quite grasped the concept of the Cosmere at that point, which is Brandon Sanderson's like interconnected. He has so many different novels and they all kind of connect. It's kind of like the MCU for like fantasy stories, fantasy books. And so, but then I started to get little hints of it and I realized that there were some things that weren't necessarily connecting. Not that you have to read the entire Cosmere. I think Sanderson does a good job of allowing series to be standalone if you want them to. But I am definitely like, interconnected world, I eat that stuff up. So I was like, man, I need to go back. And so I started reading every single Cosmere story in order, like in release order. And so part of that, I started it with Way of Kings. And part of that was I wanted to go back and reread the Wax and Wane series where they fit into the story and see if I can catch those references that I wasn't catching at first. So all that to say, this is the second time I read Alloy of Law. And I really, it's okay. I like the idea of following up 300 years with the world of Mistborn. I think that it lends really well to where the last book in the first series left off. And the world building here is great. You can really tell kind of how everything flowed from that event, which if you've read Hero of Ages, like it's crazy. And so a lot of the stuff that happened at the end of Hero of Ages then translates into Alloy of Law, and it's really good. But like I was saying with Way of Kings, like 50% of the reason you would read a Brandon Sanderson novel is for the characters, and I don't think they're there in this book. You can kind of tell that he kind of wrote this book on a whim and then came up with the rest of the series later because the characters changed significantly. And it just doesn't really feel like he necessarily knew where he was going with them. Wax especially, who will later become my favorite character in this series, doesn't really feel like an interesting character at all. Marassi isn't really that interesting. Steris isn't a character. And Wane is typical Wane, but he doesn't really have a character. He's just a goofball. And so, yeah, the story is also not, it's more fast-paced than the original Mistborn. He's going for like a gunslinger thriller type vibe with this book, which isn't the same as the original Mistborn series. And so while it's cool and while the world building is really cool, I didn't really like this one that much in terms of characters and things like that. So that's going in 3 stars. I would read it again, but like it's not his best work. Next up is Emperor's Soul. And Emperor's Soul is going to go in A tier. Emperor's Soul is kind of funny because Brandon Sanderson is known for writing these like humongous like tomes, like You collect his books, and that's like a full shelf. Like every book is at least 500 pages long. Emperor's Soul isn't that. The Emperor's Soul you can read in probably 2 hours. It's like less than 100 pages. It's really good. Everyone who I had heard talk about it before I read it claimed that it was his best book or one of his best books. I think it's a great entry point to Brandon Sanderson. If you're like, this guy sounds cool, but I don't know if I want to commit to, you know, a 600-page novel. The Emperor's Soul is easy, and it gets you familiar with his writing style, his magic systems. Yeah, overall, I really like this book. It's not my favorite, and I think part of that is because at the end of the book, there's kind of this action scene, and this book isn't full of action. It's a lot of character conversation. It's a lot of characters thinking and doing things, but not necessarily fighting. But, you know, it's a fantasy book, so Sanderson has to fit in his fighting somewhere, and so at the end, there's kind of this extended action scene that I kind of felt didn't really fit and kind of honestly dragged the story down a bit. It kind of clashed, I thought, with the themes of the story, but that might just be me. I think besides that, like if that was cut, I think this would be a 5-star read for me. If you're intimidated by Brandon Sanderson, The Emperor's Soul is a great place to start. Following that up with Words of Radiance, this is the second Stormlight novel following The Way of Kings, and you're just gonna see a trend right now. Words of Radiance is going, oh, it's doing this thing again, is going in S tier. Yes, this book, a lot of people say is their favorite. I don't think I would give it the mark of the favorite. I think it's just below Way of Kings for me, and Way of Kings isn't even my favorite of the Stormlight books that I've read so far. So this one, for me at least, is kind of trailing in last place. Not to say at all. Obviously, 5 stars, absolute amazing book. This is the book that you think of when you think the Stormlight Archive. This has all of the hype moments. Everyone knows the duel scene. Everyone knows the clash in the sky scene. Like, this is where it picks up and goes crazy. The only reason that I don't love it as much as I love The Way of Kings is I feel like The Way of Kings was a much more compact, tightly knit story, and The Words of Radiance feels a little bit more episodic. Like, you'll get a series of scenes that kind of wrap up an arc, and then we'll go on to the next arc, and then the next arc. And they're all kind of connecting, but it doesn't feel as much like this scene feeds into the next scene, feeds into the next scene, feeds into the next scene, feeds into the next scene. And I think Way of Kings does that interconnected story really, really well. And I think Words of Radiance is not as tightly knit, if that makes sense. But even so, like, this is, I think, Kaladin's best book. Kaladin's arc really makes sense following The Way of Kings, and he has to make some really hard decisions. And I think his character is just great. Dalinar as well. I love Dalinar. Shallan, again, I think trails in the main characters, but that's not at all to say that she is the worst. Or at least, that's not at all to say that she is a bad character. I just think that when we're focusing on her, I'm kind of like, can we get back to like Kaladin and Dalinar again? Because they are doing great. Yeah, I think that that's pretty much what I have to say. This is just an amazing book. If you've read Way of Kings and you're like, do I want to commit? Do I don't? Just know that Words of Radiance, for many people, is better and definitely has some insane moments that you don't want to miss. Moving on, Shadows of Self. So Shadows of Self is the second book in the Wax and Wayne trilogy, and this one is also going in B. And I have to say, I love Brandon Sanderson, and I think even at his worst, his books, at least to me, are very enjoyable. I really love them, but Shadows of Self is gonna be 3 stars, and honestly, I think that this is my least favorite Cosmere book that I've read so far. It's just rough. It feels like, so Alloy of Law builds up this plot that you start to get an idea of. There's the set, they're capturing certain Allomancers, and then Shadows of Self ditches that entirely. And we're focusing on a completely different villain called Bleeder. The plot itself, I don't think is set up super well. It's not foreshadowed well in Alloy of Law, which makes sense because Alloy of Law was kind of a fluke, and then Sanderson said, let's follow that up with 3 more books, and Shadows of Self kind of was the first step in that, and so I think that is kind of why Shadows of Stealth feels rough. I just didn't really like it. I didn't find Bleeder super interesting because she didn't feel connected to the plot. I didn't find any of these characters interesting because it felt like they were only just now starting to grow into what they were to become, when that should have started happening, I think, in Alloy of Law. There's a lot of politics in this book, and I usually don't mind it, but they just felt awkward and not very fun. Yeah, I didn't like this book, I will say. There is one scene at the very end, kind of the resolution of the climax, that will hurt. I thought that it was amazing, and that was the only part of the book that I liked. There's one scene, and you're like, oh, shoot, that's insane. And it's pulling from like world building usage that you hadn't thought of, and it's also like really pulling on an emotional thread that they've kind of been tugging at this whole book, and it really just unravels in this really beautiful way. And for like 2 pages, you're like, wow, I can see what he's trying to do here. And then the rest of the book is kind of meh. Like, I would read it again, but I'd be reading it to get to the later stuff, which is really good. Speaking of the later stuff, we have got the Bands of Mourning, which is going to go in A tier. I actually really like this one. Yeah, if the Shadows of Self and Alloy of Law are like these fast-paced, gunslinging mystery novels just with magic powers, the Bands of Mourning is like Indiana Jones with magic powers. It's basically like the hunt for this relic that was in the original Mistborn book, which I think is really cool, but like after the first book, they don't really talk about it again, and you don't really think about it until you start reading the Bands of Mourning, but then it's like, whoa, hey, where did that go? And so it's like this whole adventure to like find this thing, capture it before the bad guys do, who are back, like the bad guys from the first book. It gets back into the plot that Alloy of Law was kind of trying to set up, but it leans more into the characters that Shadows of Self tried to start. And so I think that this is where those two kind of mesh for the first time really well. I think that this is where the Wax and Wane series really starts to take off, is with Bands of Mourning. And there is one chapter, hang on, I have it in my notes. What chapter is it? So in chapter 28, I think that's one of my favorite Cosmere moments. I don't know if it can compete with some of the like pop moments in the Stormlight archive, but there's this really, really good scene. I've reread it a few times just because it's like, wow, it's just awesome. And you really, really start to get to know these characters. You really start to understand what makes them tick and kind of their internal struggles and battles. And I think this is where the characters start to get interesting. This is also where Steris comes into play, and Steris is just a goat. Mistborn Secret History. So 3 Mistborn books in a row. This one's kind of like a novella, like a side story. Like you can read this kind of if you want. It'll answer some questions if you have questions. I'm going to stick this in 4 stars, although it's probably like the bottom of 4 stars because it's kind of a weird one. It takes this retcon that Sanderson does to the very first book in Mistborn, like Mistborn 1, and it retcons something that happened in a way that I don't really care for. However, this is amazing for world building. It's essentially like a Cosmere novel, where you're like exploring the Cosmere just through the eyes of a particular Mistborn character. And I can't even say who that is because that's like spoils the whole thing. It's really cool in terms of world building, but like I said, that retcon really bothers me. I've talked with, a friend or two about it, and it's just like, it's gonna take a while to adjust to. And I know that this retcon is something that Sanderson supposedly had in mind from the beginning. It's kind of something that I'm trying to just adjust to, but I don't know. It was fun. It's a fun read. It'll take you back to the original Mistborn era, and you'll be like, oh wow, this is a vibe. I really like this. And it's also like, just drip feeding you Cosmere lore. It's great. Okay, Crown of Midnight. This is a non-Brandon Sanderson. Is this our first non-Brandon Sanderson? Yeah, like I said earlier, I only read like one author. But this is like kind of halfway through the year. I was kind of like, man, I need to take a break and I need to read something else. So I read some other books. This was the first one, Crown of Midnight, and unfortunately, I guess I should have just stuck with Sanderson, because Crown of Midnight is going straight into 2 stars. Like, yeah, I don't really like this book. I don't know if I like this author. I kind of think I don't like this author. It's a shame because my wife really likes this author, and I can't. And maybe it's just because this was her first series. Maybe it gets better, but I just really found this hard to read, and my wife was reading it with me. She's not read this particular series, so she was kind of reading it at the same time, and we were both like, this is hard. It's like the characters are unfortunately really stupid. Like, not a single character makes a coherent choice. It kind of just feels like they make decisions on emotions, and their emotions tend towards spite and revenge, and so they'll do things that don't really make sense in order to one up other characters or prove themselves to other characters. I don't know. It's just, it was a hard read. I think this book is like 400 pages, and they're like easy to read. Like, the font is big, and it took me a month. I don't like to leave books unfinished. Like, once I start a thing, I think it's just like the perfectionist in me. And part of it is just, I feel like I can't form a full opinion of a book if I haven't seen it through to the end. But this book really pushed me to the limit. I almost put it down like 3 times. Like, it was so hard. And at the end, I just had to muscle the last 100 pages or so in like a day or 2 just to get it over with, because it was dragging on for too long. And I wanted to read something I like again. So yeah, I don't think I can recommend this unless it's your vibe, but I did not like it at all. All right, going back into Brandon Sanderson because I learned my lesson. Edgedancer. Edgedancer is another like little novella side story, except for this one is for the Stormlight Archive. So we're gonna stick this one in 4 stars. This one is fun. It kind of takes a scene from the Words of Radiance that I thought was not the most well done, the new character being introduced, and it takes that character and expands them in an interesting way. It's also pulling on things that happened in Words of Radiance, things that happened with Seth, and it's fun. It is enjoyable. You get to see a different side of the Cosmere that you don't see a whole lot, and it also adds to the lore. Like, there's some things in here that you're like, huh, how does that work? Huh, who is this Midnight Mother that everyone's talking about? And what is going on with Lift? What is happening here? So yeah, really cool. Kind of takes place immediately after Words of Radiance. You kind of see the effects of the end of Words of Radiance play out in this. Easy read. I enjoyed it. Here we've got book 3 of the Stormlight Archive. Oh, that's not right. You know where it goes. I forgot. I need to do this again. Okay, that's stupid. Yeah, Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. Book 3 of the Stormlight Archive. And this one, guys, this one is kind of divisive, I think, in the community. I've heard a lot of people say they really don't like it, and I've heard a lot of people say that they love it. And I think the reason that a lot of people don't like it is because the first nice chunk of it is kind of slow. For me, I kind of fell in love with the slowness of it. I think the way that Sanderson really builds his characters was interesting to me, and I was fine with him taking his time to really flesh these characters out and show us who they are, where they're going, where they've come since we started reading about them. I think this is the first book where I started to get interested in Shallan. I feel like Shallan is finally doing things that I was like, oh, that's cool. Shallan, I think, is more major focus of this book, even more, or at least even better than Words of Radiance, which is kind of supposed to be like a big Shallan book. I didn't really care that much about her, but in Oathbringer, she really steps it up. But you don't read Oathbringer for Shallan. Okay, if you're reading Oathbringer, you are reading it for Dalinar. Dalinar goes crazy in this book. I love Dalinar. Dalinar is my favorite character in the series. So in Way of Kings, you're essentially introduced to 3 main characters, and I've heard different people say each one of those different characters is their favorite character, and I think that probably says something about someone, who your favorite of the 3 main Stormlight characters is. I don't know what that says about a person, but I think it probably says something about a person. Anyways, this book is really cool. I remember about maybe halfway to 2/3 of the way through, there's this like crazy scene, like this huge momentous occasion, like climax level stuff. And I was texting a friend, like, I don't know how this book can still have 500 more pages, because it feels like the most insane battle just happened and it feels like the book should be over. I don't know how it can top this. And then he was like, just wait, just read the end. And I read the end and it topped it. The last like 150 to 200 pages of this novel are some of the most hype, most insane, most crazy things I've ever read. The ending of this book left my jaw dropped multiple times. The enemy that's kind of been slowly building, kind of lurking in the shadows, like reveals himself in full force this book, and you're just like in awe. Like he's so terrifyingly powerful. You really get a sense of the scale and like the malice that this guy has, and you are just like, he is gonna eat everyone alive. And it really makes the stakes feel huge. This book feels gigantic. The scope of it and everything that's happening just feel enormous. And this was my favorite book that I read this year, without a doubt. I think about this book constantly to this day. It was amazing. Next up, we've got the Arcanum Unbounded, which I'm just going to stick in A. It's kind of hard to rank this one. You could probably stick it between here. I'm going to stick it up here. This is essentially a short story / novella collection of the Cosmere. Pretty fun. It has stories like Mistborn Secret History, like The Emperor's Soul. It has Edgedancer in it, and then it has a lot of other little stories too that don't really have their own editions. It's enjoyable. Not every story is amazing, and I'll link my Goodreads review of this book. I go into a ranking of every story, so if you're interested in hearing what I thought about each of the different stories in this, you can check that out. But I'm not going to say a whole lot about this. There's a lot of different stories, and most of them are pretty good. I'd give it a check out. My favorite story is Sixth of the Dusk. Check that one out at least if you're thinking about this. Earlier in this video, I said I learned my lesson, but I in fact did not learn my lesson because I went back to the series for one more try, and this is the worst book I read this year. I hate The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. In fact, we're putting it at 1 star. Okay, so this book is a prequel short story collection to this Throne of Glass series by this author. It comes after, release order-wise, after Crown of Midnight, but it takes place before everything else. And so we're in the main character, and we're kind of following through a sequence of events. And so my first problem with this is that it's in this short story format, but it didn't need to be because every story kind of just follows one story arc. It's like different episodes to a TV show, but it's all just, they just follow after each other. With a tiny bit of tweaking, this could easily have been a full-length novel, and it would have read a lot better for that. The second problem that I have with this story is that there's no really tension. And the nature of prequels is often that it is hard to feel like characters are in peril or things because you know what happens to them, right? They show up in this later book, or maybe they don't, and you're like, oh, they're going to die. And The Assassin's Blade definitely suffers because based on facts that we know from the other 2 books, we know exactly who's going to live, who's going to die, what's going to happen. And so there are some really strong emotional moments in this book that just fall flat because of that. Thirdly, I don't know what it is, but this is where her characters are the most intolerable. I know I talked in Crown of Midnight about how I really hated the characters and how stupid they are. The Assassin's Blade takes all of that and makes it 100 times worse. And I think the word that I would use to describe this is pretentious. Every single character feels really pretentious, and you kind of get the sense that maybe it's just the author who's really pretentious. I don't know. This book sucked, and it was easily the worst book I've read in my life, and my wife is calling me, so I'll be right back. Okay. Moving on to White Sand. This is the Brandon Sanderson graphic novel that he tried doing. This one I'm gonna give 3 stars. It was kind of weird. I feel like if it had been written as a regular novel, it would have been a lot better than it ended up being. The graphic novel format just didn't really work. I feel like he didn't get to explain the mechanics of his world and really wasn't able to develop characters in the way that he is usually so good at doing. Like, the magic and the world building felt very Sanderson, but the characters felt kind of flat, which is not usually what I think a Brandon Sanderson character feels like. Even if you feel like a character isn't really working, you can tell that he's at least trying to not like let that character be flat. And I feel like that really shows in White Sand that he wasn't able to do that. Going here with, this is Dawnshard, another one of those little novellas that he wrote. I'm going to put this one also in 4 stars. This one, I think I have very similar opinions to Edgedancer in that it is kind of a shorter book that kind of digs into more of the Stormlight world, but it isn't really part of the main plot. And it follows some characters that we've seen in other books, but we haven't gotten a lot of interaction with. It's really interesting. I think that the world building and the lore of this book is a lot more significant than an Edgedancer. And some of the characters are characters that I never really expected to like really fall in love with the way that this book allowed me to, especially like the Lopin. He just absolutely pops off in this book and has an actual like genuine, really cool character arc that you hadn't seen from him yet. So yeah, I really liked Dawnshard, and yeah, it's a cool little side story. Okay, this last one on the list I just finished maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, and this one's kind of special. This is Verity by Colleen Hoover, and basically I got married about a month and a half ago, and so one of the things that my wife and I were saying to each other was like, we should pick out books for each other to read on our honeymoon. We're both big fans of books, so we were like, that seems like a good idea. And so this is the book that my wife picked out for me to read during our honeymoon. And I will put this one at A. And maybe there's a little bit of sentimental value that goes into that rating. It is a Colleen Hoover book, which I know Colleen Hoover is known for, like, her kind of known for writing these like romance novels that really wouldn't normally be my speed. This is, however, more of a thriller. We don't get a whole lot of that like romance vibe as much. And it's much more like, I think like Frida McFadden kind of vibe, like this girl ends up at this house and there's like a disabled woman, but she kind of is creepy and is like, you kind of think maybe she's faking it. It's very, very interesting, had me hooked. I don't usually get creeped out by books. I read It a few years ago and like, it really didn't faze me in the slightest. This book left me really creeped out at some points. It was really good though, I enjoyed it. I didn't think the plot resolved in the way that I necessarily would have loved it to resolve. But regardless, it was a fun read and it will just stay in my memory as the book that I read on my honeymoon. And it was really enjoyable. I really liked it. So that's my list of all the books that I read this year. And I kind of want to make this channel kind of into like a journal of my thoughts on books that I read. So I'll probably be doing more regular updates on books that I read going forward in 2026. But definitely my goal for 2026 is I'm obviously going to keep at the Cosmere by Brandon Sanderson. I'm probably like 2/3 of the way through that. And so I want to keep on. I'm really invested. I just want to keep on going into that. But I'm also going to try to spice it up with some other reads. I have a few on my list that I really want to read. I think after I finish the book I'm currently reading, which I am probably going to make a video on soon, I'm going to read this book by Stephen King. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's like the title is a date. It's like 11/22/64 or something like that. Stopping the JFK assassination, and just the idea of Stephen King writing a book about the JFK assassination really appeals to me. And so I'm excited to read that, and I'll let you guys know how that goes. I have some other books that I want to read this year, so I'll be updating you guys. But until then, stay safe, stay warm. If you're in where the blizzard is about to hit, just be careful, and I'll see you later.